So I want to talk about biases and fallacies today. And the ones I'm going through here, a good resource for these is these two books by David McRaney. One is called You Are Not So Smart. The other, You Are Less Dumb Now, the sequel. So basically, McRaney's not a psychologist. So these are basically pop psychology books. But he does do his research, and everything's documented in these books. Everything's cited. So they make a nice research just if you want some information on a lot of biases, kind of one by one. So let's start with confirmation bias. We, as human beings, tend to focus on information that confirms what we already believe. We tend to ignore information that contradicts what we believe, right? And this can lead to faulty information processing. Argument from authority. We tend to value the opinions of those who have status, credentials, or authority. This is true even when their opinions are in areas unrelated to their areas of expertise. So we might listen to, for example, a political authority figure, talking about science that they have really no qualifications to talk about. Argument from ignorance. This is when people decide that something is true or false because they can't find any evidence to the contrary. When people are ignorant about a subject, they're more likely to believe strange things about it. When you don't know anything about it, one explanation becomes as good as another, as long as there's some coherence there. So this is why, people who don't understand science will think up funny reasons for things and the like. Straw man fallacy. This comes up in politics a lot. Basically reframing your opponent's position so that it's easier to defeat, as opposed to arguing based on the facts. Often this involves creating some kind of fantasy scenario. So you might say something like, do you want my opponent to take your freedom away? And that's a straw man, right? It's easy to knock down. Obviously, no one wants their freedom taken away. But obviously, in most cases, your opponent doesn't actually want to take your freedom away. So, reframing your opponent's position so that it's something very easy to defeat, but usually inaccurately. Ad hominem fallacy. This is attacking your opponent's character in an argument, attacking someone directly, as opposed to arguing the issue based on the facts, right? This is something that people often resort to when they feel threatened by an argument, when they get desperate in a debate, right? They'll just start throwing insults at the person rather than focusing on the issue. Groupthink, a few of these will have to do with group mentality. In a group discussion, people mostly desire to reach consensus and avoid confrontation. Remember, human beings are social. We like to get along with each other. We depend on each other. We value order, the order of consensus over the chaos of conflict, right? But if no one speaks up, progress is often hindered. So I've seen this in meetings sometimes where there'll be an idea, it's not that great of an idea, but everyone will be like, yeah, fine, let's do that. And then someone will speak up and go, wait a minute, is this actually a good idea? And then a few minutes later, everyone's like, no, that actually wasn't a good idea. We were just agreeing with something because it was easier to agree. So that's groupthink. Along those lines, conformity. Humans very easily conform to authority and conform to social pressures. Again, we're a social species. Our species has long depended on group membership and allegiances to survive and thrive. We're a tribal species. So it's adaptive to do this, right? But conforming to authority, conforming to a group also has its dark side as well. It can lead people to do things they wouldn't do otherwise. Affect heuristic. And heuristic just is a term that refers to mental shortcuts that our brain makes. And this one is basically we rely on emotions over rational thinking when making judgments. This isn't always bad. Our emotions don't always lead us astray. Sometimes people say, go with your gut, and sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not. But basically we make decisions, we make judgments based on our immediate emotional responses rather than thinking them through. Self-serving bias, we like to feel good about ourselves. We like to feel confident. We like to feel like we're valuable human beings. So we tend to exaggerate our successes, exaggerate our skills, our intelligence. We excuse our failures or shortcomings. I'm not good at this, but it's okay because whatever. Yeah, sometimes we get down on ourselves, but more often than not, people tend to think unrealistically highly of themselves. Third person effect is kind of along the lines of a self-serving bias. We think that other people are more gullible and susceptible to persuasion than we are. So sometimes we think we need to protect those impressionable other people. For example, this is where censorship comes in. So think about it as a third person. There's one person who's saying something we don't like. We're okay with hearing that thing because we're smart enough not to be, uh, influenced in some negative way by it or persuaded by it. But we don't think that imaginary third person out there is, so we have to keep them from it. Consistency bias. We often fail to admit how our opinions have changed over time. We like to think of ourselves as coherent beings throughout our lives, right? I always thought this way about something. I never thought this way that I'm now kind of embarrassed by. We want to see ourselves as consistent. So sometimes we'll even revise our past narratives, right? We want to be a coherent person. Now, yes, sometimes people will embrace a narrative of change, especially if their life story is one of self-improvement, right? I used to be a drug addict or something, and now I'm reformed and I'm doing good things with my life. But for the most part, people like to view themselves consistently. Common belief fallacy. This just means just because a majority of people believe something doesn't mean it's true, right? A majority of people used to think the world was flat. Now most of us don't. Historically, masses of people have often held wrong beliefs about the world that turned out to be wrong. Science has done a lot to give us a clearer picture of the world, but we still often see, a lot of people believing something that's not true. So just because something's a common belief does not mean that it's true. This one's called the Ben Franklin effect. I'll explain why in a moment. Basically, it means our attitudes are often preceded by our actions. So we do something without really thinking about it, and then after the fact, we come up with an explanation for why we did it. So we tend to like people we've been nice to. We tend to dislike people who we've harmed in some way. If you do something that causes harm to another person, there's a tendency to try to dehumanize them. So the reason this is called the Ben Franklin effect is because Ben Franklin, when he was in Congress, I believe, needed to get this other guy on his side for a vote on a bill or something. And he knew this other guy didn't like him, so he had to get this other guy to his side. So how's he going to do this? You would think if you're trying to get someone on your side, you would, kiss up to them, do something nice for them, something like that. But Franklin was clever, and what he actually did was he asked this guy to do him a favor, to do Ben Franklin a favor. And the guy did Franklin a favor, and after that, the guy seemed to like him a lot more. So what happened was this guy's mind, coherent thinking, he said, well, because I did him a favor, I must like him, right? So that caused him to change his attitude. So attitudes often preceded by actions. The backfire effect, often when people are presented with factual evidence that contradicts their beliefs or challenges their beliefs, instead of altering their opinion, they will do the opposite. Their beliefs will grow stronger. They will argue for them more assertively. So this is a form of identity challenge, I think, and it elicits a aggressive response from people. And it doesn't necessarily matter the amount of proof you give someone, they will still often dig in on an incorrect opinion. So that's backfire effect. Another group mentality one, de-individuation. So this is what we think of as like mob mentality. In certain conditions, we lose our individuality and follow a group mentality. We lose our individualism. This isn't so much a need for inclusion or or acceptance like conformity is, but think of it as a loss of being yourself, a diffusion of accountability, right? Because I'm in a large group, I'm just part of that group, so I'm not accountable for what I do. People will lose their inhibitions in a large group. And the main factors involved here, how anonymous are you in the group? How big is the group? A bigger group leads to more de-individuation. How aroused the group is, right? How stirred up the group is. So this is what happens with like riots and things like that. Sunk cost fallacy. We hate to give up on something we've already invested a lot in, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's effort, even if the loss can no longer be recovered. So, if you invest a lot of money in something, a business or something, and it's clearly failing, you still want to try to, keep it going, even though it would be better just to, let it fail and move on. If you've invested a lot of time in a relationship with someone, you want to keep that relationship healthy and keep it going, even if there's really no hope for it anymore. So remember, a fear of loss motivates us more than a fear of gain. The loss frames are more motivating than gain frames. This is also similar to status quo, where we'll stick with something when we've invested in it just because we want to justify that investment to ourselves. And then finally, self-enhancement bias. We protect our self-esteem through defenses and delusions. Realism does not equal happiness, right? Having an accurate view of the world does not necessarily make us happy. An accurate view of ourselves doesn't necessarily make us happy. So we have these positive illusions about ourselves. Illusory superiority bias, this unrealistically positive view of ourselves. The illusion of control, the belief that we can control our own destiny. And finally, optimism bias, the belief that everything will work out well for us. So that's just a list of a whole bunch of biases that maybe you will notice in human nature